Beware the Promise today is a videographic adaptation of a photo essay I did some time ago. It is about the demise in Guyana in the early 1970s of the very first trains to be introduced in all of South America in 1846. Really, it is about the impact on the Guyanese people, particularly the poor and vulnerable and the rural, of a peculiar political culture which arose in that time and has continually plagued the country through successive administrations up until now. It is offered as symbolic caution and a reminder of how the placing of party politics, the paramountcy of the party was a much touted doctrine of the ruling party at that time, above country, led to ruin then and could likely, without extreme vigilance now and in the future, rob the country of its newfound wealth. The country at the time was in a very oppressive mood under a government so paranoid about its legitimacy, of which it had none, that it could not tolerate free speech. Journalists and photographers were routinely harassed and worked under seriously threatening circumstances. I was banned from the National Archives, arrested and hauled off to the police station on occasions, suffered equipment seizures, intimidated by police and party thugs on the street, and it grew so dire I had to have a bodyguard while photographing protests and disturbances in the city. But I was lucky. Father Dark wasn't. He was an elderly expatriate Jesuit priest who was a photojournalist for the Catholic Standard newspaper, and he was killed by party thugs in broad daylight as he covered a protest in front of the magistrate's court. This is also the period in which Dr. Walter Rodney was assassinated. A society partially impoverished by the burden of supporting an unnecessary and alarmingly high ratio of military persons to civilians, an increase of 800% over 10 years, is what Guyana had become by the 1970s. Compounding the problem was the government's equally alarming lack of vision, the absence of foresight that attended the demise of an infrastructural support on which the poor and vulnerable and rural depended did not build, its impact was to destroy. It disregarded the historically significant value of the first trains to be introduced in all of South America in 1846. Trains propelled America to the status of an economic superpower in the world. The placing of the country's interest over personal political interests could not, in a poor, underdeveloped country, have driven the choice to scrap them. It's fashionable now to regard industry as the engine of growth. We seem not to realize that the fuel for that engine is culture, the very way we are. The adulteration of that fuel gave rise to a lack of regard for history, and our engine sputtered and stalled. The wheels of our economy ground to a halt under the arrogance of blaring sirens announcing the arrival of backwardness, and a dangerous political culture which evolved into a tradition is today still proudly on display. That absence of vision left and continues to leave strewn in the way forward the carnage of vehicular accidents on the potholed roadways and innumerable other hardships rippling throughout wide swaths of the society, with the poor feeling the brunt of that abdication of good sense in favor of relatively small personal benefit. These problems impacted the people not as a glancing blow or a side swipe, but full on and leaving in its wake a trail of overgrown societal failures. The persistence of that abdication kept people locked in a disadvantaged state, with such empty sloganeering as "make the small man a real man" spewed ad nauseum in the faces of broken people lying paralyzed by poverty on cities' pavements, and literally sinking into the dark depression of the grave after the exhaustion of endless protests for bread and water and even more prayer. Prayers to try to stave off the normalization of that which in an earlier generation, characterized by Martin Carter in poetry as the terror and the time, would have been taboo. People felt that spiritually they needed to be bathed anew, and George Lamin would in time come to describe the tone in the country thus: "Today we meet in a dangerous land and at the most dangerous of times. The danger may be that supreme authority, the supervising conscience of the nation, has ceased to be answerable to any moral law, has ceased to recognize or respect any minimum requirement of ordinary human decency." This is repeating itself. It was a struggle just to face the dawn and make the day's catch, or to reap the riches of labor in the fields where were planted what felt like it could be the last batch. Guyanese faced this daunting struggle with an astonishing spirit of determination to overcome, and with a high degree of innovativeness. Should they, with this experience of leaders putting their personal interests and that of their party above country, trust their newfound wealth to this same culture of governance which gave rise to a regrettable decision to ruin the very first trains in all of South America?